Welcome to this meeting. I'm welcoming you from Australia. I'm unfortunately unable to attend in person, but it's wonderful to be with you, with the IEA Executive Director, Dr. Fatih Birol, Ministerial Chair, Secretary Granholm, many ministers who I know are in town in Paris, industry leaders, and I see a number of you there in front of me, and the many distinguished guests that I know are present in Paris, and some of whom will be at this event. Welcome to this side event of the IEA Ministerial Meeting, dedicated to sharing ideas about how we can accelerate the deployment of low emissions technologies and knock down the barriers to the adoption of those important technologies. My name is Angus Taylor. I'm the Minister for Industry, Energy and Emissions Reduction in Australia. I'm pleased to be co-chairing this meeting with my good friend, Minister Tasrif, the Minister for Energy and Mineral Resources in Indonesia. And it's great to be here with him co-chairing this event. By way of introduction of the event, I think it's important to recognise that whilst ambition is enormously important, we all recognise this, ambitions to get to net zero as soon as possible. But achievement is ultimately what counts. As the world pursues practical pathways to achieve net zero by 2050, the significant role of low emissions technologies in decarbonising economies has never been more important. And I think some of the events we've seen around the world and in Europe in particular in recent weeks just highlights how important it is to have these pathways. The IEA's Net Zero by 2050 report highlights the need to accelerate the deployment of technologies, and they include, of course, solar, clean hydrogen, advanced storage and batteries, carbon capture utilisation and storage technologies, and a number of others. And I'm sure those of you in the room can think of others in particular that you see offering great potential. These technologies provide substantial opportunities for achieving the outcomes that we talked about in the Glasgow Breakthrough Agenda, which we've enthusiastically supported and endorsed, and meeting the goals, of course, of the Paris Agreement. Bringing these technologies to competitiveness with their higher emitting alternatives is the key to widespread adoption. It's also the key to widespread adoption without trading off our economies. We all understand that it is always going to be much easier to decarbonise if we can do it in a way which doesn't trade off economic strength, economic prosperity and economic opportunity. But we know that there are significant barriers to deployment that we have to overcome, and we need to speed up the access to affordable, more secure and low emissions technologies. The unique circumstances of every country here and every country dealing with this issue, which is the whole world, of course, means there's no one size fits all for technologies. A portfolio of technologies across the world is necessary to solve this problem. But there's one thing I think we can all agree on, even if there are different technologies that each of us need to focus on, and that's that collaborative innovation and R&D to drive down costs and therefore increase deployment is absolutely key. COVID-19 has shown us what can happen if governments and the private sector collaborate across the globe with a clear goal, with clear missions, with clear outcomes in mind. And those outcomes can be enormously powerful, and they can happen far quicker than we might anticipate. In a moment, we'll be commencing our panel discussions, but first we'll have three brief keynote remarks, starting with my good friend, the US Secretary of Energy. I'd like to thank Secretary Granholm for her leadership of this year's ministerial meeting as we work to meet the challenges facing the global energy sector now and into the future. Then we'll hear from Dr. Birol. Of course, his leadership we're all very familiar with over the last 7 years. It's strengthened international energy security cooperation and evolved the relevance of the IEA to be the global authority on energy analysis and the enormous influence that it is today. Minister Tasrif will then make a distinguished keynote address, which will look at the role of international cooperation and the role of governments to support large-scale deployment of low emissions technologies. As I said, I had hoped to be with you today, but I've been unable to get there. But I have asked Australia's ambassador and permanent representative to the OECD, Brendan Pearson, to step in and moderate the panel discussion today. I'll now ask Secretary Granholm to make her remarks.
Good morning, everyone. Excuse me, my thanks to Minister Taylor of Australia and Minister Tasrif of Indonesia for organizing this session and for asking me to speak. Let me just start by saying that I really do have you, Minister Taylor, and your fellow citizens, and we all do, in our hearts as you all respond to the devastating floods along Australia's east coast. I understand that this disaster has impacted your home district, and all of us here are praying for the safety of your family and your community and your neighbors. You know, the floods in Australia reflect our purpose here as we launch this 2022 IEA ministerial. This, as Minister Taylor has said, this is the moment to step up our collective efforts to put action behind these pledges and to deepen our investments and meaningfully accelerate, and I really emphasize the word accelerate, this clean energy transition. It's the moment to make 2022 the year of implementation. These two crises, the crisis of the climate and the crisis of what is happening in Ukraine, are both accelerators, obviously. I can promise you that the Biden administration's commitment to both is ironclad on energy, on climate. In our first year, we in the U.S. laid out our path to net zero. We made massive investments in the clean energy technologies that are world-renowned national labs and applied energy programs are researching and developing and demonstrating and deploying. We set these ambitious goals for cutting our carbon pollution in half by 2030, by reaching 100% clean electricity by 2035, and by achieving a net zero economy by 2050. We, DOE, the Department of Energy, put over $2.4 billion into clean energy research, development, demonstration, and deployment. We repurposed and rebooted our loan programs office inside of the department, which has now over $40 billion of loan authority for big deployment projects. And most importantly, we passed the first part of President Biden's Build Back Better agenda, which for our sake, for the Department of Energy's sake, gives us $62 billion to begin building clean energy infrastructure nationwide. And we are using that money to modernize our grid, to harden it against cyber and physical threats, and to prepare it for wide-scale energy deployment, adding capacity. We're using that money to help secure a domestic battery supply chain. We're using that money, most consequentially, to fund the clean energy demonstration projects, which will commercialize next-generation technologies that'll help us decarbonize faster. Large-scale demonstration is a critical part of the clean energy puzzle. We've already got incredible technologies that are right on hand, that are off the shelf, that are efficient, that are effective, that are ready to go. Solar, wind, electric vehicles, chief among them. We have to, though, deploy as much of these as we can, as fast as we can, wherever we can. But we know that deployment of those won't be enough. Last year's IEA analysis found that only 6 of 46 clean energy technologies are cheap enough to get us on track to meet the Paris Agreement. These demonstrations that we are undertaking at the Department of Energy help us to figure out how to lower costs for an important group of the remaining technologies, like clean hydrogen, like carbon dioxide removal, carbon capture, sequestration, geothermal, advanced nuclear and storage, particularly utility scale and battery storage for vehicles as well. If and when we succeed, I'll just say when we succeed in moving these technologies from the field to the market, we will, and we have to deploy them at scale, of course, not just at home, but we will be able to, with partners all over the world, deploy them. And that's why we are expanding our collaborative partnerships on the international stage. Back in Glasgow, I announced our Net Zero World Initiative. That's DOE's signature contribution to President Biden's Build Back Better World program. And through that initiative, we'll be working with partner nations to design specific strategies to get to their clean energy goals for the clean energy transition. So, for example, we've enlisted in that effort our 17 national labs, our 9 sister federal agencies that are working on this with us, collaborators from universities, from think tanks, from businesses, from philanthropies, all working together on this initiative, this Net Zero World Initiative. These teams are working with our 6 inaugural Net Zero World partner nations to chart roadmaps for decarbonizing key sectors from electricity to agriculture. This is in partnership with those nations, in respect for those nations, using the assets that those nations have to be able to get them to reach their goals of net zero. And I'm glad that a couple of partners are with us here at this time, Egypt and Ukraine. The others are Indonesia, Nigeria, Chile, Argentina. So all of this work, net zero, not just Net Zero World, but all of the Biden administration's goals and what we've set out to accomplish is aided, honestly, by IEA's remarkable capacity for modeling and analysis. And much of that, of course, has emerged thanks to Dr. Birol's just incredibly bold vision for an IEA that is equipped to tackle the 21st century and the 21st century challenges in energy that we are seeing right now. I thank him so much for his leadership, just as I thank all of you for your partnership, which brings me back to this side event and this ministerial today. I just have to say, I'll note that as ministerial chair, I may have to step away from some of our sessions early, so please forgive me if I do. But regardless of whether or not I'm in the room, I want everyone today, I hope, to spend time describing the essential steps that your government or your business or your industry is taking. My hope is that we can use these next 2 days to illuminate ideas and spread the word on practical, actionable efforts that any one of us could take on to learn from one another. Maybe it's progress from eliminating an inefficient policy. Maybe it's unfair trade barrier that you are knocking down to speed deployment. Maybe it's an innovative way to reduce the cost of a key clean energy technology. Whatever it is, I want us to use this ministerial and the IEA in general as a platform for sharing great ideas and poaching great ideas. My favorite time, I was a former governor, my favorite time was going to the National Governors Association and the sessions where we all sat together to share what we had done, our favorite parts of the past year, so that I could take a notebook of ideas and bring it back and copy exactly that. That's what we want to happen. There are a lot of great ideas here. We want to poach the best. My team will tell you that my mantra is deploy, deploy, deploy. And over the next 2 days, our mantra is to figure out how. How can we deploy, deploy, deploy? Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Secretary Granholm, and thank you for your comments about Australia. I also, look, I think your point about having clear goals and a focus on the technologies, what you're doing in your labs, I've had the privilege of seeing is extraordinary. Your focus on getting the cost of those technologies down, and I know that you have a target for getting the cost of hydrogen down to $1 a kilo, which is similar to our focus on H2 under 2, getting to under $2 a kilo, Australian dollars, I should add. But that focus is, very much appreciated. The collaboration I know you're doing, I think, is enormously important too, and a highlight of what you just talked about then. I now welcome Dr. Birol to provide your keynote intervention.
Many thanks, Mr. Taylor, Secretary Granholm, Thank you very much for your leadership for our ministerial meeting, but also beyond. Very much appreciated, Madam. Minister Taylor, thank you very much being our vice chair of our ministerial meeting. And we hope to see you in Paris with us, but as Madam Secretary said, you have definitely very important reasons to stay at home and join us from Australia. Also, many thanks to Minister Tasrif for the great cooperation we have with Indonesia on many areas, but including our joint work for the G20 presidency of Indonesia. Dear colleagues, this ministerial meeting of the IEA happens at a watershed moment for the global energy system. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has caused a major humanitarian crisis. And given Russia's role in the global energy system, this humanitarian crisis leads to an energy crisis. And it is the reason, I guess, today and tomorrow we will discuss with all our ministers and partners here how the global community can respond to this energy crisis caused by the unprovoked invasion of Russia and its consequences. Dear colleagues, we know once again Russia invasion of Ukraine reminded us the critical importance of energy security, but it also reminded us the way out of such major challenges we may see in the future, namely leaving the old partners behind us and looking at a cleaner, securer energy future. We should not forget that in addition to the humanitarian crisis we are seeing, leading the energy crisis, there is another crisis, which is the climate crisis. And this should be also something that we should be discussing in the next days to come. And I think what we have seen in the last few weeks should not be a reason to stick what we have, but how we can retreat and how we can go forward. The world is definitely, the world energy system is a historical turning point. We are going to turn somewhere, but the issue is which direction we are going to turn. And I hope, and IEA will do everything it can to turn in the right direction, namely cleaner and securer energy future. As Minister Taylor said, last year we published a roadmap for the world, how the world energy system can reach a net zero by 2050. And in this report, we have basically two tasks. One, to make the most out of the existing clean energy technologies, such as renewables, such as electric cars, such as efficiency, such as in the countries where it is accepted nuclear power, to make the most out of them in the next 10 years. As Madam Secretary mentioned, countries like US have very strong targets in 2030. But this is not the entire homework we have based on the IEA's net zero roadmap to 2050. To make a big expansion of the existing clean energy technologies are not enough. We have another homework, which is to innovate and bring the technologies which is under development to the markets. Hydrogen, again, Madam Secretary mentioned, Minister Taylor mentioned, advanced batteries, carbon capture and storage. They should be the part of our energy system, and this can only and only happen if we have these technologies under development bring the cost to the current technologies level, bring the cost down. There are many impediments in front of that, but I would like to highlight one impediment and the solution, which is the international cooperation. International cooperation, according to our analysis, if it is done in the right way, it can help to bring the cost of new technologies down considerably. So therefore, this meeting, our ministerial meeting, bringing some 40 governments around the world, which covers a huge amount of the global energy consumption, and I hope it will give a boost to international cooperation in this meeting and also beyond. Dear colleagues, I would like to finish by two final remarks. When we see clean energy technologies coming, and we see that they are coming, we see that a new global energy economy is emerging. Even though these new technologies wouldn't need fossil fuel supplies, they will need something different, which is also very important, which is some of the critical minerals for the supply chain. And this is an important issue, an issue that the International Energy Agency is hopefully going to look into very closely. And I am also happy to say that the Prime Minister of Australia has decided, together with the International Energy Agency, to co-host an Indo-Pacific Clean Energy Supply Chain Forum in July in Sydney. And we are very happy that we are going to work with the Australian government to have this forum in order to address how we can create resilient supply chains. And our flagship publication, Energy Technology Perspective, will provide the framework for this discussion. Dear colleagues, I would like to finish by saying that once again, coming to the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as International Energy Agency, we have done a few things. We have, thanks to the leadership of United States and all other governments agreeing, we release oil stocks to the market to help the markets to be more stable. We published, in terms of gas for Europe, a 10-point action plan, how we can reduce the natural gas imports from Russia between now and next winter. We just published a 10-point plan, how we can reduce the oil use in a hurry in the next 4 months when the driving season starts. But I would like to say that these are temporary solutions. The real solution to address such problems is transitioning to clean energy and have a clean and secure energy future for all. And the IEA will definitely push all the countries, try to inspire all the countries to reach that future. I thank you very much, and many thanks. And back to you, Mr. Taylor. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Fatih. And as always, your comments are incredibly insightful. The IEA's approach to this has always been useful because you've always seen the role of a broad portfolio of technologies as critical to getting to our goal of net zero by 2050. But can I also thank you for a free bit of advertising there for our Clean Energy Summit, Supply Chain Summit in July, and for highlighting the importance at a time when we're struggling with energy security for traditional energy sources, that we make sure we have energy security in our supply chains for newer, low emissions technologies and fuel sources. So thank you for that. Now it's my great pleasure to hand over to my ministerial counterpart from Indonesia, Minister Tasrif, to make his keynote address.
Thank you, Minister Taylor, Secretary Granholm, and Dr. Fatih Birol, also other participants, distinguished panelists, and ladies and gentlemen. I would like to say good afternoon from Yogyakarta. I'm in Yogyakarta now because tomorrow we will open the first session of Energy Transition Working Group in Yogyakarta. I would like to highlight to the three challenges that Indonesia in particular and numerous world countries in general are facing in our effort to accelerate the energy transitions. One, how we can continuously transform and readjust existing energy structures and systems in terms of organizational systems to infrastructures so that they can respond and support the energy transition process. Two, how we can provide huge financing to proceed with the use of sustainable energy now that the global COVID-19 pandemic has seriously jeopardized the previous plans and strategies to shift to greener world. And the third, how we can develop the technologies as well as new skills, capacities, and expertise domestically to support our country's respective energy transitions target. Of these three challenges, I think we should focus on the technology because it is a game changer in creating sustainable energy systems. Technology is the key to energy transitions and eventually to net zero emissions. Many powerful technology solutions are already available to us, while some will soon become available. Therefore, to accelerate energy transitions, we need to scale up the widest variety of technologies. Innovation should be continuously encouraged and disseminated. Access to technology use and utilization should be made more inclusive. Subsequently, access to affordable technology and financing has to be massively explored. And the next, the conversations carries on to how to deliver these technologies to the market. For example, how to reach the economic of scale of each technology, how to unlock the capital that these technologies need for deployment, such as the incentives for public and private investment in research and development. For me, these three questions point to one answer. We have to create international cooperation. In order to enhance international cooperation, the Indonesian G20 presidency of 2022 aimed to promote three pillars, which the presidency has considered relevant to current global challenges. These pillars are global health architectures, digital economic transformation, and energy transitions. They are expected to actualize the presidency's main theme of recover together, recover stronger, which international communities are currently seeking for. Furthermore, the G20 Energy Transition 2022 Forum has had three main priorities, namely access, technology, and financing. On the technology priority, the forum aims to address issues relevant to industrial decarbonizations, such as renewable integrations, scaling up of the widest variety of technologies, and energy efficiency, as well as greener and cleaner industry development. Honorable Ministers, distinguished panelists and participants, international cooperation means that we need to communicate, discuss, and deliberate at a global level to formulate effective policies, to propose alternative mechanisms to establish useful framework. Because in an international cooperation process, we need opinion sharing by policymakers and industry actors in order to make the decisive steps to energy transitions. And this is where the International Energy Agency can support in strengthening global cooperation by providing a benchmark best practices and recommendations, by facilitating knowledge sharing, by forging collective global cooperation with a view to efficient and innovative technologies in order to realize affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy transitions. Having said that, I would like to remind you one thing. The result of our global cooperation should always be adapted to the local context. New standards, mechanisms, and certifications should be developed according to national circumstances. Because we all have our common but differentiated responsibilities in our net zero emission action. We all have our respective political, economic, and legal system. And at the same time, we all want to make sure that we meet or exceed our pledge to net zero. Finally, I would like to conclude by thanking Minister Taylor and his team for the excellent collaboration in co-chairing today's event. My deepest appreciation also goes to Dr. Birol and the IEA team for organizing the meeting. I wish you and your team for their achievements. I would like also to extend my highest appreciation for the support and assistance from IEA to Indonesia. I hope we can continue our cooperation on the basis of Indonesia IEA Energy Transition Alliance. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Minister Tasrif. Thank you, Minister Tasrif, for that perspective, for your focus on the importance of international collaboration, which I think we wholeheartedly embrace, certainly here in Australia, and I know others around the world do as well. We heard that from Senator Granholm. But thank you also for bringing the perspective of another country from the Asia Pacific, a voice that's not always heard in some of these discussions, but an enormously important voice because it's such a fast-growing part of the world. So thank you again. I'll now hand over to Australia's ambassador to the OECD, Brendan Pearson, to facilitate today's panel discussion. I'll leave it to him to introduce the panellists, but I will say up front, we do have an extremely distinguished panel today. Thank you so much to all of you for participating. Brendan Pearson.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for the, and to other presenters so far, because I think it provides a good backdrop for our session, which is, and the panel is, the composition of the panel this morning, I think reflects the sort of self-evident fact that in order to reach our climate targets, we're going to need the investment, the ingenuity and the innovation of the private sector. I won't introduce all of the, I won't run through the presenters straight away. I'll do that as we go through to maximise the time we have. We've got about 30 minutes for a quick-fire session. I'm going to start with the CEO of Shell, Ben van Beurden, and I'm going to ask, my question to Ben is, what are the sort of challenges that are to Shell, one of the world's largest energy producers, facing in order to meet its own climate mitigation targets? But also, what does it expect from policymakers? What are the policy levers that it needs to reach those targets?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ambassador. I think for Shell, of course, we have two sets of challenges. The first one is how do we reduce our own emissions? We have about 80 million tons of emissions ourselves. If you go back to a reference year that we have 2016, and we've set out to halve that by the end of this decade. We're reasonably well on track. We've done 18% so far. And of course, we have challenges in doing that, but I think we probably know how to do it. With efficiency improvements, electrification of demand, CCS, repurposing facilities, etc., etc. But the bigger challenge, of course, is to deal with the emissions of our customers. That's not 80 million tons, that is 1,550 million tons. And the only way we are going to change these emissions is actually by offering different products. We cannot take the carbon out of hydrocarbons. And that's, I think, where the main challenge is. And let me therefore go straight to the point that I would like to make. If we are going to change the nature of the products that we sell, we need to have different policies encouraging the use of those products. And therefore the focus should not be so much on, can we produce hydrogen? Yeah, we can. Can we produce biofuels? Of course we can. Can we produce clean power? Yes, we're learning how to do that as well. We can do all of that. But the point is, does it make economic sense to sell this to customers who are still focused on the lowest cost of energy possible? Now, carbon pricing may help, and carbon pricing has played an enormous point in, of course, industry and also in the decarbonization of electricity. But in the end, if you really want to go large-scale decarbonization of sectors of the economy that are much harder to decarbonize, aviation, industry, petrochemical, steel, etc., pricing is not going to do the job. Carbon pricing is absolutely necessary, but totally inadequate. And therefore, in my mind, Ambassador, we need to get to mandates. We need to make sure that if you want to decarbonize aviation, that there is a mandate for sustainable aviation fuels. Sustainable aviation fuels are 3 times as expensive as petroleum-based aviation fuels, so therefore we cannot make them economically relevant for airlines. But if you have a mandate to put 5% in the mix, then of course it doesn't really matter what it costs. It just needs to be delivered. And of course, as we deliver these sustainable aviation fuels, the cost of supply will go down. We don't need laboratory work to figure that out. We know how to do it. It is technology replication that will actually drive this down. Much in the same way as solar also became affordable because we just spent $2 trillion as a world figuring out how to do it cheaper. And therefore, I think the most important thing that we need from governments right now is increasingly, not exclusively, but increasingly a focus on the key sectors of the economy that will all have a different recipe to reduce their carbon intensity and to figure out what is the best set of policies to drive that decarbonization. It can be mandates, it can be standards, it can be bans, maybe indeed a very bespoke piece of carbon pricing, etc. But every sector of the economy, whether it's aviation, heavy-duty road transport, shipping, chemicals, steel, will have a slightly different recipe. And companies like us can supply anything that is needed and do it economically as efficiently as possible. But we cannot outperform 100 years of innovation in petroleum-based products in a few years' time. That is just impossible. That needs to be overcome with mandated government policies. That would be my key point this morning.
Thank you very much, Ben. That was terrific. I thought we might move to another part of the energy system, which is grids and the enablers of the energy system. And I'm going to ask Claudio Facchin, CEO of Hitachi, to talk about how, from that perspective, pretty much the same question. What are the challenges that his part of the energy system is facing? And again, in that part of the economy, what do we need from the policy operating environment?
Thank you, and pleasure to be here. I can only echo some of the messages that we heard this morning, starting with maybe giving from a technology provider standpoint, and we're very much as Hitachi Energy focusing on transmitting, distributing the electrons that get generated, and hopefully more and more with clean energy resources, but then also that gets more and more consumed across the sectors. We heard a lot about collaboration across sectors, across technologies. But as a technology provider, I want to give the comfort to all the stakeholders that many of the technologies that today we can deploy can take us quite far in our journey to carbon neutrality. If you look at what we need to deliver between now and 2030, particularly in the mission-critical infrastructure such as grids, you need long-term planning. And we are, of course, as technology provider, investing and will continue to invest and continue to innovate in technology. It was said also in the various reports, we heard it also from Fatih Birol, that there is a need for investing in technologies such as, for instance, green hydrogen. But between now and the next 10, 15 years, everything that we have to deploy is available and the technology are mature. What we need is to force ourselves to innovate in the way we collaborate, in the way we create an ecosystem, including regulation, including policies, that will give the right signals in terms of how to best deploy at the speed and at the scale of those technologies. So my key point is when you look at the electrical system, and it goes without saying that, of course, the more we electrify, the more efficient the entire energy system will be. We have to continue to invest in that part of the energy equation, but we have to find ways, international collaboration, collaboration across sectors, designing policies that allow to optimize regulatory environments across sectors, transport, industry, electricity. Otherwise, we will not be able to deliver at the speed and at the scale that is required.
Thank you, Claudio. The next sort of element I'm going to go to Kevin Gallagher from Santos. He's from one of Australia's largest oil and gas producers. And the question for Kevin is that sometimes there's an assessment that fossil fuels are an obstacle to reaching our targets. I know that you've got a different view, and I want you to explain that view. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. Well, look, I think first of all, I'd agree with much of what Ben said. You know, the pressure to date has been very much on the supply side, and unfortunately, you know, as Ben also said, we can make hydrogen, we can supply clean energy, but we really need the demand side to be requiring it. And today, there's still a thirst and a demand for fossil fuels, and it's growing rather than shrinking at this point in time. However, capital for technologies to either develop those energy sources and the clean fuels that we need to develop for the future is required, and these take very major and very significant capital investments, long cycle capital investments. And when you have an unstable energy environment like we have today, it's very difficult to A, get access to that capital for those investments, but secondly, to make those investment decisions. And so I think that's where the work of industry and governments needs to come together to encourage those investments in new technologies like CCS, carbon capture and storage, or CCUS, as well as clean fuel technologies such as hydrogen. For us in Australia, we've worked very hard with government over the last few years to get to the point where now carbon capture and storage projects can qualify to generate carbon credits, Australian carbon credit units. What that's allowed us to then do is to invest significant investments in our Cooper Basin assets in Australia to sanction the second largest CCS project in the world. Unfortunately, today, there are only 40 or so CCS or CCUS projects around the globe, and we need that to grow 100-fold to meet our net zero aspirations for the future. And so I'd encourage governments to be looking at policy to not only think about the clean fuels of tomorrow, but to really encourage the decarbonisation of the fuels and the energy sources that we're going to be requiring for the next 2 or 3 decades to provide a stable transition. And so things like qualifying for carbon credits. In the US, I think they've got the 45Q tax incentive scheme that encourages investment. And I'd encourage governments to look at more incentivizations along those lines to encourage the very, very considerable capital investment required to decarbonise through the transition, not only to be thinking about the fuels that we're going to be supplying at the end of the transition. And one other area I think that's critically important is governments working internationally together to put in place bilateral agreements, or should I say, to operationalise Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement so that we can get more of these investments. And indeed, for Santos, the current investment environment in Australia, or the focus on carbon credits, has allowed us to take FEED recently on what would be the world's largest carbon capture storage project in the Timor Sea. But that will require international collaboration between the Australian government and the Timor-Leste government in particular to allow that project to happen. And that can take up to 10 million tonnes per annum, which then allows us to decarbonise other projects, other industries in the region. And even in the Cooper Basin, we're investing in technologies like DAC, direct air capture, which allows us to go well beyond our own emissions. And I think, we shouldn't limit ourselves as an industry to only decarbonising our own projects. We have the skills, the reservoir, the geological knowledge to make these projects work and use our existing reservoirs, our depleted reservoirs around the world to create storage businesses. So we at Santos, to come back to your question, Brendan, sorry, we're very focused on building a new business, and that business is a carbon reduction business, not only thinking of it as a business or a project to decarbonise our fossil fuel business, but to actually use those reservoirs that we've depleted over decades and create third-party carbon storage businesses, which we say there'll be a huge opportunity for going forward.
Terrific. Thank you, Kevin. I think we're going to interrupt the panel session for a very special guest. And I would like to introduce Mr. Yaroslav Demchenkov, Deputy Minister of Energy for European Integration from Ukraine.
Madam Secretary, dear colleagues, friends, excellencies. Today is day 28 of the war that has already changed the life of every Ukrainian, the war that can change the life of all Europeans, the war that sent shockwaves across the globe. Russia's war is also wage of the energy butterfly, trying to dominate the European continent and maintain its influence with energy weapons. Russia wants you to think that Russian energy is irreplaceable. But this is not the case. Europe can and should take a set of action to make Russian energy unimportant. Putin is sure that he has an intelligence influenced to commit his crimes against freedom and progress. We should hold him accountable. Ukraine was raising the alarm about Russia's energy attack on Europe since the last summer. These record prices are not the result of a lack of energy resources, but are the result of a conscious policy of Russia aimed at creating panic on energy markets. Russia wants the entire Europe to kneel down before it. Europe should meet this challenge with the dignity and resolve. We should ensure our energy security and not dividing from the planet green course. The war and the current energy crisis should be a turning point for Europe in ending Russia's energy blackmail and achieving global decarbonization goals. These tragic events, in particular, should act on a catalyst of three main directions. Stop using Russian energy as soon as possible, wherever possible. Some types of fuel are easily replaceable now. We see that European business stop buying coal, oil, LNG and fuels from Russia. We welcome this approach by the business. It should become the official policy of governments too. Introduce financial restrictions on other types of energy which are not easy to replace, including pipeline gas. Review plans to the use of gas as a transitional fuel, taking diversification and energy security into account. Enable substitution of gas by other sources, for example, with green hydrogen as soon as practically possible. And third, invest in balancing capacities, including storages, to enable more use of renewables. Commercialization of other latest green technology in energy. In the long run, they will guarantee energy independence and effectively contribute to the goal of the Paris Agreement. In each of these issues, Ukraine can become a reliable ally and partner. During the months of full-scale war, our energy system showed its resilience in face of numerous challenges, including operation in island mode. We disconnected from Russia and Belarus grid, bombing and destruction of critical energy sector infrastructure, capture of assets and threats of nuclear terrorism. I hope that our international partners can recognize Ukraine not as a liability, but as an asset that will help strengthen the European energy system in achieving decarbonization goals, strengthening electricity supply to Europe, using Ukrainian underground gas storages for reserves and gas transit. And this turning point, we call all OECD countries to look at the situation with clear eyes and act united to prevent further energy crisis. Countries should not give up on their decarbonization goals and should work together to integrate energy markets and reduce dependence on the predatory Russian energy resources. Ukraine is paying high price for its independence and future. Last month demonstrated Europe's ability to unite our countering aggression and to hope that the same will be true in the energy sector. Thank you so much for your support and solidarity with our country. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Minister, for those comments. It's a reminder of the geostrategic importance of energy, and I think that also applies, as Fatih Birol said in his opening remarks, to the future role that will be played by critical minerals. And Lynas, an Australian company, has been a pioneer in developing critical minerals and rare earths production in Australia and Malaysia. And so I'm going to ask Pol Le Roux, Vice President of Downstream at Lynas, given the importance of critical minerals to the future clean energy economy, what are the policy settings that you're looking for, both at a national and international level, to make that critical minerals rollout possible?
Good morning. So REES is a specific list of elements that are enablers for more efficient motors, so basically energy-saving generators. I think the most important for us is consistency of policies. The REES industry went through a so-called REES crisis in 2011. Not long ago, when the prices went up by 1,000% with restriction of export from China. And so that raised a lot of plans, and 2 years later it was forgotten. So that's the second lesson. And you missed the exam once, maybe second time is good to succeed, and put in place persistent policies. And in fact, I spent 20 years of my life delocalizing things, manufacturing from France, Japan, USA to China, so I was the bad guy. And now for 12 years I'm trying to make the other way around, realizing that it takes a lot of efforts to rebuild the expertise. It was very easy for a young kid like me to cut his costs by moving to China, so then the margin is higher, not realizing that for 20 years all the expertise moves to China, and China has fantastic engineers today, and we must have this in mind. So the challenge for us is to have a long-term vision, because we need to address a very big challenge. keeping in mind that no one pays a premium for so-called green minerals or multi-sourcing. It does not exist, only in dreams, okay? And buyers always want to pay the same price, whether it comes from China or from Linus, doesn't matter. So your goal is to look long-term and be cost competitive. There is no business without muscles. Muscle is your cost. You need to be cost competitive. And so you are trying to address this challenge that Chinese are working on race for over 50 years, and guys like me stopped that outside China 20, 30 years ago, so we need to catch up. The other point is that in any place in China, you have cheap access to energy, electricity, and chemicals, basic chemicals. In a chemical world, if you don't have access to these 2 points, competitive energy and competitive basic chemicals, you can be very smart, you will never fix the challenge. So it's important to have support from patient capital, so-called governments, to make sure there is an infrastructure in place so that new players can really set up a competitive base that will be here for long term, not just for 2 years where we talk about it and afterwards we forget. Thank you.
Thank you, Pol. That was terrific. I was thinking the other day that the IEA is like the cheerleader, the muse, and the truth teller in the path to the energy transition. And so I'm going to ask Mary Warlick, Deputy Executive Director, and I'm not sure which of those roles she's going to play this morning, but how the IEA can help industry governments in their path towards the energy transition.
Well, thank you very much, Brendan. And let me just start by saying thank you very much to Minister Taylor, to you, your entire team, in your role as Vice Chair of this Minister for convening this discussion. I think it's really an excellent way to beginning our ministerial, and I'm just really honored to have here sitting next to me such an impressive range of CEOs that have already outlined so many of the important messages that are going to be critical to bringing to the market and really accelerating the pace of our development of new clean energy technologies that will be just critical to driving the transition. Obviously, I think one of the key messages that so many of you have touched on, Secretary Granholm and Dr. Birol and Minister Tasrif did as well, is this important theme of international collaboration and cooperation, that we do very much need to take the approach that we are all in this together and looking to share best practices and technologies in a way that will help all of us in our countries and our work all around the globe at whatever point we're at and with whatever priorities each country has, I think is going to be critically important. I'll just underscore a couple of the messages that Dr. Birol put out on the table. And these were highlighted in our net zero report. For those of you who've seen it, they won't be new, but to really underscore, first of all, that while we do have many of the clean energy technologies, the developments, for example, in wind power and solar PV, and of course, the continued importance of emphasis on energy efficiency. And those technologies can help us to get to some good results in the next 10 years. By 2030, it's going to be so important to scale up those investments in all of those areas. By our estimate, annual investment in clean technologies, those we have right now, will need to more than double by 2030. The capacity of wind and solar PV, which has already been invested in significantly, needs to quadruple by 2030. And electric car sales, which are already growing at about 10%, actually need to scale up to 60% annually by 2030. So there's a heavy lift already, even with the technologies we have. But even beyond that, and this is the second point, is working together and really investing as governments and companies in the new technologies that will get us beyond that to our 2050 goals is so important. And many of those have already been mentioned, whether it's, CCUS, hydrogen technologies, battery storage, in all of these areas that will help to drive our ability to achieve our climate goals and decarbonization goals. There's so much that needs to yet be done in those areas. So very welcoming to hear what is already being done by our business colleagues, but also, of course, so much more that needs to be done by governments. And let me just say, once again, thank you for coordinating, organizing this. Ambassador Pearson, you and your colleagues, and Minister Taylor, there is great urgency to what needs to be done, but I think getting us all together today for these discussions is really an excellent start. And again, that's where the IEA, through our convening power and also through our technology collaboration programs, we're here to do whatever we can to help drive this process forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. We have around about 4 minutes left. So I thought there was one question that I might throw to the open question to all panellists, bearing in mind we've only got 3 minutes now. That is energy access. The energy transition is going to be hard enough in the developed world, but in the developing world where people, hundreds of millions of people still don't have access to energy, how do we bring them and provide them with legitimate access to energy and the opportunities that it brings while keeping within our targets? Are there any takers? Before I start not volunteering people.
Yeah, I'm happy to say, yeah, thank you. It is indeed key. There's about 1 billion people who don't have access to energy, and there's another billion who have unreliable access or poor access. We set ourselves a target a few years ago to just say by 2030 we should be able to bring energy access to 100 million people in the world who don't have it today. And I'm just reviewing how we got on. And we're not making a lot of progress, to be perfectly honest. I hate to admit it. I'd love to say, it's all going fine, etc. But this is really, really tough. Now, the pandemic didn't help. What also doesn't help, that of course energy access needs to be done in difficult areas where, operating standards are very hard to maintain, safety and everything else. But again, it goes to show that we have to have a very determined approach to this, because by just wishing it and talking about it, it's not going to happen. And the other thing to bear in mind is energy access is not to provide a solar panel and a light bulb. Energy access is to provide a livelihood that actually is significantly more than just that. And indeed, it may well be indeed renewable energy as you bring. That's the best way and the fastest way to roll it out. But we have to have, again, systems thinking there to make sure that we do this at scale, and we do it in a way that actually is profitable, because the only way we're going to have 2 billion people get energy access is to make it a business proposition for companies like us. Now, I'm struggling to make it happen. I don't know whether we will succeed in the end. I will give it everything I can. But indeed, you're absolutely right. It is an essential piece for us to get right if we want to have an equitable world. Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. I think at that point we might, if we can, hand back to Minister Taylor. There you go, Angus.
Well, thank you, Brendan.
Very positive contributions from the business sector. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Brendan. And can I thank all the panellists? Can I ask you to put all your hands together for the panellists for their wonderful contributions there? Listening to those contributions, I guess I come away with the view, as I do so often when I listen to these conversations, that I have great optimism on the power of the technologies we already have that are at commercial levels, economic sort of outcomes that have already been achieved, as well as the technologies that are in development, that there is a portfolio there that we can work with, we can invest in, and that we can collaborate to deliver. It's clear that technology by technology and country by country, there are barriers, whether they be policy, technical, financial or market, and that they're barriers that are going to need to be knocked down. I guess at the end of the day, I look at it as someone with a background in economics and say ultimately we can get deployment to happen because we pass the costs on to somebody, additional costs, if there are indeed additional costs, or we can bring the costs down. And if we can bring the costs down, we avoid having to make the economic trade-offs that limit the capacity for access. And what a great question we just heard from Brendan a moment ago, and it was a pity we couldn't hear from more of the panellists on that important question. But bringing those costs down is, of course, the key, because it allows us to deliver ultimately the outcomes we all want to deliver without trading off economic outcomes in the community. Now, if we're to achieve that, what we've heard is we're going to need more collaboration. There's no doubt about that. Collaboration across governments, and I think I'm seeing a level of collaboration on R&D in the last year or two that we haven't seen in the past, and that's very good news. We're going to need collaboration with the private sector, and the role of the private sector we've just heard from. The investment from the private sector is what we're going to need if we're going to pull this off. There is no way of doing it other than with significant private sector investment. We're going to need to have trusted supply chains if we are to do this. And what a wonderful set of comments and address we had from Minister Demchenkov. I apologise if I've got the pronunciation wrong there, but he reminded us of the criticality of trusted supply chains in the energy sector. There's no doubt that the IEA is uniquely positioned to help us with that. It can play a pivotal role, just as it has been playing a pivotal role for many years. And I believe that a follow-up IEA study and analysis of the barriers to deployment and how we're going to get those economic pathways across our technologies would be a useful piece of work. It would provide a recommended framework for developing practical solutions, and a special focus of such an analysis might be clean energy technology markets in emerging economies, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. And I think that final question and the focus on access there does highlight those fast-growing developing economies that we have to solve for. Now, there's an opportunity for us to revisit some of these issues later this year, and I'll again highlight that there'll be a forum in Sydney on the Indo-Pacific clean energy supply chains on the 12th and 13th of July this year. And the aim of this is to bring together industry, technology and government experts to identify ways we can transition towards net zero as quickly as possible and as economically as possible, whilst maintaining a focus on energy security. In addition to this, I welcome the Indonesian G20 presidency making sustainable energy transitions a top priority for the G20 leaders this year, and it provides another opportunity to consider and add to our understanding of the deployment barriers and potential solutions. And I look forward to working with the Minister Tasrif and our Indonesian friends in this important focus this year. So that brings today's discussions to a close. I would like to thank all those panellists again, my fellow ministers for their contributions, and everyone who participated in the forum for your contributions. I'm confident that we'll continue to make progress on these important topics in the coming 12 months and beyond. Thank you again.